I drove 4 hours to get to my grandmother's funeral. I had cried most of the way there, stopping once at a gas station to splash cold water on my face and remind myself to hold it together. Grandma Ruth had been the most constant person in my life, steady, warm, and honest in a way that nobody else in our family quite managed to be. Losing her felt like losing the floor beneath my feet. I turned onto Maple Creek Road just after noon, and that was when I saw it. The sign was planted right in the front yard, facing the street, impossible to miss. Red and white, bold letters. For sale, sold. Follow this story till the end. Like, subscribe, and comment the city you're watching from, so that I can see how far my story has gone. I slowed the car to a crawl. I told myself I was misreading it. I told myself it was a neighboring yard, that my eyes were tired from crying and driving. But I pulled to the curb and sat there staring, and there was no misreading it. The sign was in Grandma Ruth's yard, in front of Grandma Ruth's house, the house she had lived in for 31 years. The house I had grown up spending summers in. The house she had told me more than once was meant to stay in the family. The funeral was in 3 hours. Grandma had been gone for less than a week, and someone had already sold her home. I gripped the steering wheel and took a slow breath. Then I drove the rest of the way to the church, my mind racing with one question: who had done this and how? I found out at the reception, held at our Aunt Beverly's house after the service. My sister Diana made the announcement like she was sharing good news. She stood near the fireplace with a glass of iced tea in her hand, her voice calm and confident, and she told the assembled family that Grandma Ruth had signed the house over to her several months before she passed, that everything had been handled legally, that the sale had already gone through and the funds had been received. She said it the way people say things when they have rehearsed them, smooth, without hesitation, with just enough detail to sound official without inviting too many questions. She mentioned a lawyer. She mentioned paperwork. She said Grandma had wanted to make sure the house was handled responsibly, and that she, Diana, had been the one chosen for that responsibility. I stood near the back of the room and watched people nod. I watched aunts and uncles exchange glances and then settle into acceptance the way people do when the news is delivered cleanly and with authority. Nobody asked to see the paperwork. Nobody asked when exactly this had been arranged. Nobody thought to wonder why Grandma had never mentioned it to anyone else. I set my cup down on the nearest table. Diana caught my eye from across the room. She held my gaze for exactly 1 second, calm, certain, almost daring me to say something. Then she smiled and turned back to the conversation she had been having. I said nothing. Not then. I waited until the reception was thinning out before I approached my Uncle Gerald, who was the closest thing our family had to a calm, reasonable voice. I pulled him aside near the back porch and asked him quietly what he knew about the house. He sighed. He told me Diana had mentioned it to a few family members a couple of weeks ago, that there had been some legal arrangement made before Grandma passed, and that the sale had moved quickly because there was already an interested buyer. He said it gently. He said he understood it was hard to hear. He said these things sometimes happen with estates and that Diana had taken on a lot of responsibility caring for Grandma in her final months. Then he said the words I had been dreading. I think you just have to accept it, Iris. It's done. I looked at him for a moment. I could see that he believed what he was saying. He was not trying to hurt me. He had just already decided, the way most of the family had already decided, that Diana's version of events was the version of events. There was no room in his mind for another possibility, because Diana had gotten there first and filled all the available space. I thanked him. I went back inside. I found Diana one more time near the front door saying her goodbyes. She squeezed my hand when she saw me and said it had been a beautiful service. I agreed that it had. We did not discuss the house. I drove to the nearest motel and checked in for the night, completely alone with what I knew and what I did not yet know. The motel room was clean but impersonal, the kind of place designed to give you just enough comfort to sleep without giving you any reason to stay. I sat on the edge of the bed with the small cardboard box that Grandma Ruth's neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, had pressed into my hands after the service. She said Grandma had specifically asked her to make sure I received it personally. The box was not large. Inside there was a folded quilt square, a piece from a larger quilt Grandma and I had started together years ago and never finished. There was a photograph of the two of us from when I was about 9 standing in her garden. There was a small envelope with my name written on it in Grandma's careful cursive, and there was her old Bible, the brown leather one with the cracked spine that had always sat on her nightstand. I picked up the envelope first. Inside was a short note in her handwriting. She said she loved me. She said she was proud of who I had become. She said she was sorry that the weeks before her death had been complicated, and that she hoped I would understand everything fully soon. She said there was something important she needed me to find. And then she said, "Look inside the Bible." I set the note down on the motel bedspread and picked up the Bible. I held it for a moment. Then I opened it slowly, and something slipped out from between the pages. Before I read what fell from the Bible, I let myself sit with what I already knew about Diana. Because understanding what she had done with the house required understanding who she had always been in our family, and that was a longer story than most people realized. Diana was 4 years older than me. Growing up, she had been the one who positioned herself carefully, always nearest to whoever held the most influence. With our parents, she had been the responsible, mature one. With Grandma Ruth, she had spent years slowly becoming the primary contact, the one who managed visits, the one who answered questions about how Grandma was doing when relatives called. It had happened so gradually that nobody noticed the pattern until it was already established. When Grandma's health started declining 2 years ago, Diana had moved into action. She became the one who took Grandma to appointments. She became the one who handled Grandma's bills and mail. She said it was because she lived closest. She said it was because she cared. And people believed her because the surface of what she was doing looked like devotion. But I had noticed things during my visits. Grandma seemed uncertain sometimes, hesitant when she talked about financial matters, like she was not sure what she was allowed to say. Once, she had started to tell me something about her accounts and then stopped herself, glancing toward the kitchen where Diana was making tea. I had not understood it then. Sitting in that motel room, I was starting to understand it very clearly. The letter that fell from between the pages of the Bible was folded 3 times. My name was written on the outside in Grandma's handwriting, the same careful cursive from the envelope, but pressed harder into the paper, like she had wanted to make sure the ink lasted. I unfolded it slowly. It was 2 pages, front and back, written in the kind of detail that told me she had thought carefully about every word. She started by telling me she loved me, and that she was sorry for the confusion that her death would bring. She said she had known for over a year that something was wrong with the way her finances were being managed. She said she had trusted Diana completely at first, and that by the time she understood what was happening, she had already signed several documents she did not fully understand. She said she had spent a long time feeling afraid and uncertain, but then 6 weeks before she died, she had done something about it. A friend from her church, a woman named Carolyn, had driven her to a lawyer in Millfield, a town about 2 hours from where Grandma lived. She had not told Diana. She had not told anyone in the family. The lawyer's name was Mr. Harris. Grandma had written his full name and the address of his office at the bottom of the 2nd page, underlined twice. She said he was expecting to hear from me after she was gone. She said she had made sure of something important before she left this world, and that she needed me to go find out what it was. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it back inside the Bible. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in the motel room with the Bible on the nightstand and my mind running through the same set of facts over and over, the way your mind does when it is trying to build something solid out of pieces that are still settling into place. Grandma had gone to a lawyer 2 hours away, 6 weeks before she died, without telling a single family member. She had written me a letter and hidden it inside a Bible she made sure I would receive personally. She had underlined the lawyer's name and address twice. These were not the actions of a woman who was confused or uncertain. These were the actions of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, and was making sure it could not be intercepted. I thought about Diana standing near the fireplace at the reception, delivering her announcement with that practiced confidence. I thought about the sold sign in Grandma's front yard. I thought about Uncle Gerald telling me to accept it and move on. I thought about how smoothly Diana had covered every angle, the paperwork, the timeline, the family's acceptance, and how certain she had seemed that the story was closed. She had forgotten one thing. Or rather, she had never known about one thing, because Grandma had been careful to keep it that way. I picked up my phone and found the address Grandma had written down. Millfield was 2 hours north. I set an alarm for 7 in the morning. I was going to make the drive alone, and I was not going to tell anyone where I was going. I left the motel at 7:15 with a gas station coffee and Grandma's letter on the passenger seat. The drive north was quiet, small towns, 2-lane roads, fields still brown from the end of winter. I had the radio off. I needed the silence to think. I thought about calling someone. My cousin Lee had always been close to Grandma and had seemed uncomfortable at the reception when Diana made her announcement. There had been a flicker of something on her face that I had noticed and filed away. But I decided against calling anyone. I did not know yet what I was going to find in Millfield. I did not want to raise questions in the family before I had something solid to stand behind. Diana had spent years mastering the art of shaping how people understood situations. I was not going to give her an early warning. I drove through Millfield just before 9:30. It was a small, quiet town. A main street with a hardware store, a diner, a post office. The law office was on a side street, in a converted house with a small wooden sign out front that read Harris and Associates. I sat in the parking lot for a moment after I turned off the engine. I thought about Grandma Ruth making this same drive 6 weeks before she died, with her friend Carolyn at the wheel, carrying something heavy and important that she had trusted nobody in her immediate family to know about. I picked up the letter. I got out of the car. I walked to the front door and knocked. Mr. Harris was in his late 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the kind of careful, measured manner that told you he had spent decades listening before speaking. His assistant had called him the moment I gave my name at the front desk, and he had come out himself to greet me rather than sending someone else. He shook my hand. He said he was very sorry about my grandmother. He said it the way people say things when they mean them, not as a formality. Then he brought me into his office, closed the door, and sat across from me with a folder already on the desk between us. He told me that Ruth, he called her Ruth, which told me they had spent enough time together for formality to fall away, had come to his office on a specific date 6 weeks before she passed. She had come with a friend who waited in the reception area. She had been composed, clear, and completely certain about what she wanted. He said he had asked her the standard questions lawyers ask when an elderly client comes in without a family present, questions designed to assess clarity of mind and freedom from outside pressure. She had answered every one of them without hesitation. She had told him about the first document she had signed, the one that had transferred the house to Diana. She said she had signed it during a period when she was frightened and confused about her finances, and had not fully understood what she was agreeing to. She said she wanted to correct the record before she died. Mr. Harris opened the folder on the desk and turned it toward me. The document inside the folder was clean and precise, the kind of legal paperwork that leaves no room for interpretation. Mr. Harris walked me through it slowly, pointing to each section, explaining each element in plain language. It was a will. A complete, formal, properly drafted will. Grandma Ruth had dictated her wishes clearly, the house on Maple Creek Road, and a specified portion of her remaining financial assets, were to be distributed equally between her 2 granddaughters, Diana and me. Not transferred entirely to Diana. Not sold at Diana's discretion. Split equally, as Grandma had always intended. At the bottom of the document were 3 signatures besides Grandma's own. 2 witnesses, Mr. Harris's assistant and a notary public who had been present in the office that day. And a notary seal stamped and dated. Mr. Harris explained that the document met every legal requirement for a valid will in this state. It had been drafted properly, signed voluntarily, and witnessed by qualified parties who were not beneficiaries. He said something else that I needed to hear clearly. In cases where 2 wills exist, and both are properly executed, the more recent one generally takes precedence. Grandma's second will was dated 6 weeks before her death. Whatever Diana had gotten Grandma to sign before that date, whatever document she had used to justify the house sale, this document was newer. And it had been specifically designed to address it. I looked down at Grandma's signature on the page. Her handwriting careful, steady, certain. She had known exactly what she was doing. Mr. Harris told me things that afternoon that settled into me slowly, the way cold water settles when you drink it too fast. He said Grandma Ruth had come to him not just with a request, but with documentation. She had brought bank statements. She had brought a record of transactions from her personal checking account going back 22 months. She had organized them herself in a folder, with certain amounts circled in pen. The pattern in those statements was not subtle once you knew to look for it. Regular transfers to an external account. Withdrawals on dates that corresponded to times Diana had taken Grandma to appointments, times when Grandma had been in the car, away from her own home, away from her phone. Grandma had noticed the pattern herself. She had been tracking it quietly for months before she came to Mr. Harris. She had told Mr. Harris that she did not want to cause a family crisis while she was still alive. She was tired, she was ill, and she did not have the energy for the confrontation it would require. But she was not willing to leave this world without making sure the truth had a place to surface. She had made sure her second will was the vehicle for that truth. And she had made sure that someone she trusted, me, knew where to find it. Mr. Harris said that Grandma had asked him specifically to wait until she passed before taking any steps. She had not wanted the situation to accelerate while she was still living. She wanted peace in her final weeks. But she had also made sure that the moment she was gone, the process could begin. She had thought of everything. Mr. Harris filed the second will with the probate court 3 days after my visit to his office in Millfield. He had been prepared for this moment. The paperwork was organized, the procedural steps were mapped out, and his office had handled contested estate cases before. He told me the process would take time. He told me it would not be simple. He told me that Diana would be notified and would almost certainly push back. I told him I understood all of that, and that I wanted to proceed. I drove back to my home city that evening and began the waiting period that follows when you have set something in motion that cannot be stopped, but that takes its own time to unfold. I went back to work. I answered emails. I cooked dinner in the evenings and sat with the strange, suspended feeling of knowing that something large was moving slowly beneath the surface of ordinary life. Mr. Harris called me at the end of the first week to confirm that the filing had been accepted, and that all required parties had been formally notified. He was professional and calm. He said the probate court would review both documents, Diana's transfer paperwork and Grandma's second will, and that the process of determining legal validity would proceed according to standard procedure. He reminded me not to discuss the details with family members until the legal process had moved further. I agreed. I had not told anyone anything yet. I had learned from watching Diana work that timing and silence were two of the most powerful tools available, and I intended to use both of them. Diana called me on a Thursday evening, 9 days after Mr. Harris filed the will. I was in my kitchen when my phone rang, and I saw her name on the screen and let it ring twice before I answered. I wanted to be settled. I wanted my voice to be level. She did not start with hello. She started with, "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice was controlled, but only just I could hear the tension underneath it, the way you can hear pressure in a pipe before it breaks. She said she had received a legal notice. She said she could not believe I was doing this. She said Grandma had made her wishes clear, and that I was dragging the family through something painful and unnecessary out of jealousy and spite. I let her finish. When she was done, I said calmly, "You should talk to your lawyer about it." She made a sharp sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a cry. She said she was giving me a chance to drop this before it became a serious problem. She said if I cared about the family at all, I would let this go. She said she had done everything for Grandma in those final months while I was living my life somewhere else, and that she deserved what she had received. I said, "Talk to your lawyer, Diana." Then I ended the call. I set my phone down on the counter and stood there for a moment, breathing steadily. My hands were not shaking. I had expected this call for days, and I had known exactly what I was going to say before she dialed. Nothing she said had surprised me, and nothing she said was going to change what was already in motion. Diana called me 2 more times that week. I did not answer. She sent 3 text messages, the first demanding, the second attempting to reframe things as a misunderstanding, the third asking if we could meet in person to work this out as sisters. I read each one and did not respond to any of them. I had made a decision early in this process that I was going to let the legal proceedings do the talking. I had seen my whole life how Diana operated in conversations, how she redirected, reframed, introduced doubt, made you feel like your perspective was the unreasonable one. She was extraordinarily skilled at it. A private conversation between the two of us with no record and no third party was exactly the kind of environment where she thrived and where I would be at a disadvantage. The legal process was the opposite of that. Documents did not get reframed. Notary seals did not bend to a persuasive argument. Bank records with circled figures did not change their meaning, because someone delivered them with a confident voice and a calm expression. The legal process was a conversation that Diana could not control, and I was going to let it be exactly that. Mr. Harris checked in with me twice that week. He said Diana had retained an attorney, and that the two legal teams were now in communication. He said this was expected and that everything was proceeding normally. He said I should continue to avoid direct conversations with Diana about the matter. I told him that was not going to be a problem. I had nothing left to say to my sister that the paperwork was not already saying better than I could. The family started asking questions about 2 weeks after the legal notice went out. I know this because my cousin Lee called me, not to pressure me, but because she was genuinely confused and a little troubled. She said she had heard there was a legal dispute over the estate. She said Diana had called her and described it as Iris causing problems. But Lee said something in Diana's explanation had not quite added up, and she had found herself sitting with questions she could not dismiss. She asked me directly, was there something the family did not know? I told her the truth, that Grandma had made arrangements that were only now becoming clear, and that the legal process would sort everything out. I did not give her details. I did not tell her about the bank statements or the second will's specific contents. But I told her she was right that there was something the family had not been told, and that she would understand it fully in time. After I got off the phone with Lee, I thought about how long Diana's version of events had gone unquestioned. She had delivered her announcement at the reception with such certainty that the family had simply absorbed it. But certainty, it turns out, has a shelf life. Once people start asking questions, once the smooth surface of a story develops a crack, doubt moves in quickly. The family had accepted Diana's version because nothing had challenged it yet. Now something was challenging it, and the questions that had always been available. Why hadn't Grandma mentioned this herself? Why had the sale happened so fast? Why did Diana seem so prepared? Were finally being asked out loud. The buyer of the house was a couple named the Hendersons who had been planning to renovate and move in by spring. Mr. Harris's office sent formal notification to the real estate agent handling the transaction, and through the agent to the Hendersons directly, that the property was currently subject to a legal dispute over the validity of the transfer of ownership. The sale was placed on hold pending the outcome of the probate proceedings. I felt for the Hendersons. They had done nothing wrong. They had made an offer in good faith, gone through a standard closing process, and were now caught in the middle of something they had no part in creating. Mr. Harris said this kind of disruption was unfortunate but unavoidable. If the sale had been made under a transfer that was now legally contested, the buyer's position was necessarily uncertain until the court ruled. Diana called her attorney. Her attorney filed a motion. Mr. Harris's office responded. The legal machinery moved forward at its own measured pace, indifferent to urgency or emotion. I thought about the Hendersons sometimes during this period, people I had never met, standing in the middle of a situation they had walked into without warning. I hoped the process would resolve clearly enough that their position would be clarified soon. But I also understood that none of this mess was something I had created. The house had been sold under circumstances that were now being legally examined. The disruption flowed from what Diana had done, not from what I was doing about it. I kept that distinction clear in my mind every time the waiting became difficult. The financial records came into the legal proceedings formally about 3 weeks in, and that was when the full picture became visible to everyone involved rather than just to me and Mr. Harris. The bank statements Grandma Ruth had brought to Mr. Harris's office, 22 months of carefully tracked transactions, were submitted as supporting documentation in the probate case. They showed a pattern of withdrawals and transfers that, once laid out in sequence, told a clear story. Over the course of nearly 2 years, a significant sum had moved out of Grandma's personal accounts in ways that were inconsistent with her normal spending and her known financial needs. The transfers had a regularity to them. The timing corresponded to periods when Diana had primary access to Grandma's financial arrangements. Diana's attorney disputed the interpretation. That was expected. But the records themselves did not require interpretation. They were dates, amounts, and account numbers, arranged in chronological order by a woman who had spent months tracking them before she was too ill to continue. Grandma had known what she was looking at. She had circled the figures herself. The financial records did not just strengthen the case for the second will. They provided context for why Grandma had taken the steps she took. They explained why she had made a quiet 2-hour drive to a lawyer she had never met before. They explained why she had hidden a letter inside a Bible and arranged for it to reach me through a neighbor rather than through the family. She had not been confused or manipulated into drafting the second will. She had been protecting what remained. Somewhere in the middle of the legal proceedings, Diana shifted tactics. She stopped calling me. She stopped sending messages. Instead, I began getting calls from family members, some I was close to, some I barely knew, passing along variations of the same message. That this was tearing the family apart. That Grandma would not have wanted this conflict. That I should consider the damage I was doing by pushing forward. That Diana was devastated. I listened to each of these calls politely and said very little. I understood what was happening. Diana had moved from direct pressure to distributed pressure, using the family as a relay. It was a strategy one recognized. When you cannot convince someone yourself, you send people they care about. What surprised me was how many of those people. When I responded calmly and told them I trusted the legal process to sort everything out fairly, said something like, "I figured there was more to this than Diana was telling us." Or, "I've been uncomfortable about the whole thing since the funeral." Or simply, "Just wanted you to know I'm not taking sides." Most of them did not pressure me the way Diana had hoped. A few of them, I think, were using the call as a way to check in on me more than to deliver a message. The family was not a monolith. Diana had assumed that because they had nodded along at the reception, they were committed to her version of events permanently. But nodding in a moment of shock is not the same as believing something fully, and a number of people had been quietly sitting with doubts they had not yet voiced. The probate court issued its ruling on a Tuesday morning, and Mr. Harris called me before 9 o'clock to tell me. I was at my desk at work, a cup of coffee going cold next to my keyboard. I stepped into the hallway to take the call. He told me the court had reviewed both documents, the transfer paperwork Diana had produced and Grandma Ruth's second will, executed 6 weeks before her death. The court had found that the second will met all legal requirements for validity. Proper form, voluntary execution, mental competency at the time of signing, and notarized witnessing by qualified parties. It was, in every technical and legal sense, a valid and binding expression of Grandma Ruth's final wishes. In cases where two valid testamentary documents exist, Mr. Harris reminded me, the more recent one governs. The second will supersede the earlier transfer. Grandma's stated wish, that her estate be distributed equally between her two granddaughters, was the governing instruction. The court had ruled accordingly. I leaned against the hallway wall and closed my eyes for a moment. I thought about Grandma Ruth making that drive to Millfield with her friend Carolyn. I thought about her sitting across from Mr. Harris with her folder of bank statements and her clear, steady voice, doing what needed to be done while she still had the strength to do it. I thought about her hiding the letter inside the Bible and trusting that I would find it. She had done all of this for me, and it had worked exactly as she intended. The house sale was reversed. This was not an overnight process. Real estate transactions involve title companies, mortgage lenders, and multiple parties, and unwinding one takes time even after a court has ruled. The Hendersons were notified formally, their legal position clarified, and the process of returning their funds was initiated. Mr. Harris told me they had been cooperative, which was a relief. A difficult situation had been made marginally less complicated by the fact that decent people were on the other side of it. Diana was ordered to return the funds she had received from the sale. She was also required to account for the financial transfers that had come up during the proceedings, a separate matter that the court noted would need to be addressed through appropriate channels. Mr. Harris explained, without saying more than was necessary, that the financial records Grandma had kept were likely to have consequences for Diana that extended beyond the estate dispute. I did not allow myself to feel triumphant about any of this. What I felt was something quieter and harder to name. Relief, yes, and grief underneath it, because all of this had only been necessary because someone had taken advantage of a dying woman who trusted her. Grandma Ruth should have been able to die in peace, confident that the people around her were acting with integrity. Instead, she had spent her final weeks driving to lawyers' offices and hiding letters and Bibles. She had been robbed of the ease she deserved at the end of her life. The court had ruled. The process had worked. But the reason the process had been necessary was something I was still sitting with. I went back to the house on a Friday afternoon in early April, about 6 weeks after the court ruling. The legal transfer had been completed, my name was now on the deed, and Mr. Harris had given me the all-clear to take possession. I drove the familiar route down Maple Creek Road and pulled into the driveway and sat there for a minute before I got out. The sold sign was gone. The yard was quiet. The house looked exactly the way it had always looked, the white siding a little weathered, the front porch with the 2 chairs Grandma had kept out there for 20 years, the window boxes empty in early spring but ready for planting. I used the spare key that Mr. Harris had obtained for me through the legal process. The lock turned cleanly. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. It smelled like Grandma Ruth. Not strongly, the house had been closed for weeks, but underneath the staleness, there was something I recognized. Something warm and familiar. The furniture was still there. Her books were on the shelves. The quilt draped over the back of the armchair was one I remembered from childhood. I stood in the middle of the living room for a long time. I did not do anything practical that day, no measuring rooms or making plans. I just stood in my grandmother's house and let it be real. This place had almost been taken from the family permanently, and it was still here. I was still here. Whatever came next, the house was mine now, and I was going to take care of it the way it deserved. Diana contacted me once more after the ruling, about a week after I had visited the house. She did not call this time. She sent a text asking if I would be willing to meet her somewhere neutral. A coffee shop somewhere public to talk privately. She said she was not trying to reopen the legal matter. She said she just wanted to talk to me as her sister. I read the message twice. I thought about it for longer than I needed to, probably. There was a part of me that still held the memory of who Diana had been when we were younger, before the pattern of her behavior had become so clear. The older sister who had occasionally been kind, who had sometimes looked out for me in the small ways that older siblings sometimes do. That version of her was a long time ago, and a lot had happened since. But the memory of it was still there. Ultimately, I decided against meeting her. Not out of anger, I had moved through most of the anger already, or at least set it aside where it was not driving my decisions. I declined because I did not believe a private conversation would produce anything good. Diana had proven, repeatedly and extensively, that she was capable of reframing situations to her own advantage. A private meeting, off the record with no lawyer present, was not a conversation I needed to have. Whatever she wanted to say to me could be said through counsel if it was legally relevant, or not at all if it was not. I sent her a short reply. I don't think that would be helpful for either of us right now. Then I set my phone down and did not check it for the rest of the evening. The family reached out over the weeks that followed one by one, in the way that people do when a situation has resolved and they are finding their way back to honesty. Lee called first. She said she was sorry for not asking harder questions earlier. She said she had sensed something was wrong at the reception but had told herself not to make assumptions, and that she regretted the silence. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. Diana had been cultivating that silence for years, and it was not Lee's fault that she had been standing inside it. Uncle Gerald called. He was quiet and a little formal, the way he got when he was feeling something difficult. He said he owed me an apology for telling me to accept it and move on. He said he had found out some of what Grandma's bank records showed, and that it had shaken him. He said he should have asked more questions. I accepted his apology simply, without making him explain himself further. Several cousins checked in. An aunt I rarely spoke to sent me a card, handwritten, saying she was glad the truth had come out. Even Mrs. Calloway, Grandma's neighbor, called to say she had followed the situation as much as she could from a distance, and that she was glad she had made sure I received that box from Grandma personally. I accepted all of it. I did not make anyone earn their way back into my good graces through elaborate apologies. These were people who had been maneuvered by someone skilled at maneuvering people. The real accountability in this situation had already been assigned, and it did not belong to them. People asked me what I was going to do with the house. It was a natural question. I lived 2 hours away, I had a life established elsewhere, and the house was a full property that needed active attention. The practical answer was not simple, and I spent several weeks sitting with it before I made any decisions. I decided to keep it. I knew that early, even before the legal process had fully concluded, In the quiet way you sometimes know things before you have worked out all the reasons. This was Grandma Ruth's house. 31 years of her life lived in those rooms. The garden she had tended every summer. The kitchen where she had taught me to make her biscuit recipe on a rainy Saturday when I was 11. The porch chairs where we had sat in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing. I was not going to sell it. I was not going to let it become something that existed on a spreadsheet as an asset to be optimized. I was going to take care of it. I made arrangements over the following months to use it as a place I came to regularly, weekends, longer stays when I could manage them. I found a local woman through a neighbor's recommendation who was willing to check on the property during the weeks I was away. I started the garden in late April, working from memory and from the notes Grandma had kept in a small green notebook I found in the potting shed. The house was going to remain what it had always been. A place in the family. On my terms, tended by my hands, the way Grandma had always intended. I sat on the front porch of the house on a warm evening in late May, in one of the old chairs that had always been there, watching the light change over Maple Creek Road. The garden was coming in, not perfectly, not yet, but it was coming. I had planted what I could remember from Grandma's routine and guessed at the rest. I thought about the last gift she had given me. Not the house, though the house was significant. The gift I kept returning to was the letter. The letter tucked inside the Bible, written in her careful hand, trusting me to find it and know what to do with it. She had chosen me for that. Out of everyone in the family, out of everyone who had claimed to be devoted to her, who had managed her final years and controlled her access and positioned themselves as the responsible ones, she had chosen me. She had done that because she knew me. Not my usefulness, not my function, me. She had watched me my whole life the way grandmothers watch, with a patience and clarity that cuts through performance and sees what is actually there. And what she saw she trusted. The house was mine now because of the legal process, because of Mr. Harris, because of the document she had signed with steady hands in an office 2 hours from home while she was running out of time. But the love behind all of that, the quiet, determined, clear-eyed love that had made her do all of it, that was the real inheritance. That was the thing Diana had never been able to take, and never would. Grandma had not just protected the house. She had made sure I knew beyond any legal document that I had always been loved.